I should have stopped at the red light, but fear doesn't wait for green signals. The rain came down so hard it blurred the windshield into streaks of silver, each drop exploding under the streetlights like shattered glass, and my old Honda Civic rattled beneath me as if it knew it wasn't built for this kind of night. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, my pulse louder than the wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the headlights behind me were still there, two white beams cutting through the darkness like they had a destination, and that destination was me. I pressed the gas a little harder, the engine whining in protest, the speedometer climbing past 45 miles per hour as Madison Avenue opened up ahead, slick and shining and empty except for one massive black SUV waiting at the cross street. The light turned yellow. I had maybe 3 seconds to decide who scared me more, the man following me or the law I was about to break. I chose wrong. The world slowed down the second my foot didn't hit the brake. I remember the exact angle of the SUV's chrome grille, the way the rain slid down its polished hood, the reflection of my tiny car in its flawless black paint just before metal met metal with a sickening crunch that echoed louder than the thunder above us. The airbag exploded in my face, stealing my breath, filling the car with a sharp chemical smell, and then there was silence except for the steady drumming of rain on twisted steel. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could see was steam rising from my crumpled hood and the taillights of the SUV glowing red through the storm like unblinking eyes. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice small inside the wreckage of my choices. I fumbled with my seatbelt, pushed the door open, and the rain soaked through my sweater instantly, cold and punishing as I stumbled onto the pavement. My car looked like it had lost a fight it never should have picked. The SUV barely had a scratch. Of course it didn't. It was the kind of vehicle that cost more than I made in 2 years, immaculate and imposing, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights back at me like dark mirrors. Then the driver's door opened. Not rushed, not angry, just deliberate. A tall man stepped out, his suit perfectly tailored, charcoal against the storm, not a single movement wasted. 2 other doors opened after his, 2 more men in dark suits taking quiet positions beside the vehicle, but it was the first man who held my gaze. He didn't look at the damage. He looked at me, slowly, thoroughly, as if he were assessing more than a car accident. The rain slicked his dark hair back from a face carved in sharp lines, his expression calm in a way that didn't fit the situation. Most people would have been shouting, furious, demanding insurance. He simply walked toward me, expensive shoes splashing through puddles like the storm had no authority over him. I felt smaller with every step he took. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, carrying easily over the rain. I shook my head, unable to find words, acutely aware of the headlights that had disappeared from behind me. The man's eyes flicked past my shoulder, scanning the empty street, and something unreadable shifted in his expression before he looked back at me. "You chose the right car to crash into," he said quietly, almost to himself. And then, after a pause that made the night feel heavier, his lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Good," he added, his gaze never leaving mine. "Now you're my wife." I thought I had misheard him at first because no one says something like that after a car accident unless they are either joking or completely unhinged, and he was not smiling like a man who joked. The rain kept falling between us, cold and relentless, sliding down his coat without disturbing the sharp lines of it, while I stood there soaked to the skin, my old sneakers sinking into a shallow puddle that reflected the red glow of his taillights. "I am sorry," I finally managed, my voice trembling more from shock than the weather. "I do not know what you think is happening, but I just need to exchange insurance information and go home." Home. The word felt fragile in my mouth. He studied me for a long second, his eyes not hard exactly, but focused in a way that made me feel catalogued. "You were being followed," he said calmly. It was not a question. My stomach dropped. I glanced over my shoulder at the empty stretch of street, the rain washing everything clean like nothing had ever been there. "I do not know what you are talking about." I lied, because admitting fear to a stranger like him felt dangerous. One of the men behind him shifted slightly, speaking into a small device near his ear, his voice too low for me to hear. The man in front of me did not look away from my face. "The silver sedan," he continued. "It turned left 2 blocks back when it saw my vehicle." My pulse pounded so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. He had noticed. He had been aware of everything while I had been panicking behind a steering wheel. "That is not your problem," I said, lifting my chin even though my hands were shaking. "This is my car. My mistake." He took one slow step closer, not invading, but close enough that I could see the faint line of a scar near his eyebrow and the way rain collected at the edge of his lashes. "It became my problem the moment you chose my car," he replied quietly. "And you did choose it." The certainty in his tone made my breath hitch. I had not chosen anything. I had reacted. I had been afraid. I ran a red light because someone was following me. I admitted before I could stop myself. I did not crash into you on purpose. His gaze softened, but only slightly. "I know." The simple words confused me more than anger would have. He gestured toward my Honda, steam still curling from beneath the crumpled hood. "Your vehicle is not drivable." I looked at it and felt the weight of reality settle on my shoulders. He was right. The front end was destroyed. Even if it started, I would not make it a mile. "I can call a tow truck," I said quickly, reaching for my phone in my pocket, only to realize it was still inside the car. One of the suited men retrieved it before I could move, handing it to his boss instead of me. My chest tightened. "Please," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Just give me my phone." He held it for a moment, glancing at the cracked screen, then handed it back to me with deliberate care. "You may call whoever you like," he said, "but I would recommend coming with me instead." I stared at him. Why would I do that? A faint hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "Because the man who was following you will try again, and because my men have already ensured he will not attempt it tonight." I did not ask what that meant. I did not want to know. The rain was beginning to soak through my jeans now, cold creeping into my bones, and I realized how exposed I felt standing in the middle of an intersection at nearly midnight. "I do not even know your name," I said. He extended his hand, not to shake, but as if offering a formal introduction in the strangest setting imaginable. "Adrian Romano." The name settled heavy in the air between us. I did not recognize it, but something about the way the other men straightened slightly when he spoke told me it mattered. "Olivia Carter," I replied automatically, even though I was not sure why I was telling him anything. His gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Olivia," he repeated, testing it. The sound of my name in his voice felt different, slower, intentional. He removed his coat then, surprising me, and draped it over my shoulders without asking. It was warm, faintly scented with something expensive and subtle, and far too heavy for someone like me to be wearing. "I do not need your coat," I protested weakly, but I did not take it off. "Yes, you do," he said simply. "You are shaking." I hated that he was right. "This does not mean I am going anywhere with you," I added quickly. "You said I was your wife. That is not how life works." A quiet breath escaped him, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice lowering so that it felt meant only for me despite the rain and the men and the ruined cars. "Marriage is not the point. Protection is." He held my gaze steadily. "You crashed into my world tonight, Olivia. And in my world, accidents do not exist. Only consequences. Consequences." The word lingered in the air between us, heavier than the rain soaking through my jeans, heavier than the ruined hood of my car, still hissing behind me, and I hated that part of me wanted to ask what he meant instead of walking away. "I do not need protection," I said, even though my voice lacked conviction. Adrian did not argue. He simply glanced past me again, toward the far end of the street where traffic lights cycled from red to green with no cars waiting. "You needed it 10 minutes ago," he replied quietly. That stung because it was true. I wrapped his coat tighter around myself, the fabric far too refined for someone who still counted quarters for laundry, and tried to steady my breathing. "If you think I am getting into that vehicle with you, you are mistaken," I added, gesturing toward the black SUV. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You are already standing in the middle of my problem," he said. "Getting into the car only changes the temperature." I blinked at him. "The temperature. You are cold," he explained simply, and before I could protest again, he motioned toward one of his men. The rear passenger door of the SUV opened smoothly, interior lights glowing warm against the storm. It was absurd that the inside of that vehicle looked more like a private lounge than transportation. Cream leather. Soft lighting. No clutter. No chaos. Nothing like my life. "I am not agreeing to anything," I said firmly. "You are not signing a contract," he replied. You were sitting down. The distinction irritated me, but the wind picked up just then, slicing through my wet clothes, and practicality began to win over pride. My car was not going anywhere. The street felt exposed, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, the man in front of me did not look like someone accustomed to hearing the word no. I took a step toward the SUV, then stopped. If I get in, I said carefully, you take me home. That is it. His gaze held mine steadily, measuring something I could not see. We will discuss home, he answered. That was not the reassurance I wanted. That is not what I said. His expression shifted, not harsher, but more intent. Olivia, he said, my name slow and deliberate again. If I intended to force you, we would not be having this conversation. The calm certainty in his tone unsettled me more than anger would have. I hesitated only a second longer before sliding into the back seat, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself I was still in control of something. The door closed with a quiet thud, sealing out the rain. Warm air wrapped around me instantly, carrying a faint scent of leather and something subtle and expensive. Adrian entered from the opposite side, sitting across from me rather than beside me, giving me space without looking like he was retreating. The vehicle began to move, smooth and controlled, as if the city itself made way for it. I watched the blurred lights outside the tinted window, my reflection pale and wide-eyed against the glass. Where are we going? I asked after a moment. Somewhere secure, he replied. I let out a breath of frustration. You keep saying things like that without explaining them. Explanation requires trust, he said evenly. We do not have that yet. The honesty caught me off guard. Most men would have lied, promised safety in prettier words. He did not. You said marriage is not the point, I said, trying to regain some footing. So what is? His eyes met mine fully now, steady and unreadable. Timing, he answered. You entered my life at a moment that is not convenient for either of us. I stared at him. That sounds ominous. It is practical. He leaned back slightly, hands folded loosely, composed even as the city lights flickered across his face. There are people who would benefit from your fear tonight, he continued. I do not allow that. The way he said it was not possessive in the way I expected. It was controlled. Protective, maybe. I swallowed. You do not even know me. A faint pause. I know enough, he replied. You run when you are afraid. You do not ask for help. And you aim for the largest target in sight when cornered. My cheeks flushed despite myself. That was not strategy. That was panic. His gaze softened just slightly. Sometimes they are the same thing. The SUV turned onto a quieter street lined with tall buildings and gated entrances. My pulse began to quicken again. Adrian, I said carefully, if this is some kind of power play, I am not interested. He studied me for a long second before answering. If it were a power play, he said calmly, you would already understand it. The vehicle slowed before a set of iron gates that opened without question. As we passed through, I felt the unmistakable shift of crossing into a world that did not belong to me. And for the first time since the crash, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. I had not just hit his car. I had stepped into his territory. The gates closed behind us with a quiet finality that echoed louder in my chest than any metallic sound should have, and I watched them through the tinted glass, as if they might reopen if I stared hard enough. They did not. The driveway curved slowly through manicured hedges trimmed with unnatural precision, leading toward a house that did not look like a house at all, but a statement made of stone and glass and controlled silence. Warm lights glowed from tall windows, steady and calm, like nothing in this place had ever been rushed or accidental. The SUV came to a smooth stop beneath a covered entrance supported by white columns, and before I could gather my thoughts, one of the suited men was already opening my door. The air outside was cooler here, cleaner somehow, carrying the faint scent of rain against fresh landscaping instead of city asphalt. I stepped out carefully, Adrian's coat still wrapped around my shoulders, painfully aware of how small I must have looked against the scale of everything around me. He exited on the other side and walked around the front of the vehicle with unhurried confidence, as if this entire night had unfolded exactly as scheduled. This is not my home, I said quietly, turning to face him. It is one of them, he replied without hesitation. That did not make me feel better. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing a spacious foyer lit by a chandelier that cast soft light over polished marble floors. No clutter. No personal chaos. Everything placed with intention. I hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of the line between outside and inside. I did not agree to this, I reminded him. Adrian paused just slightly, giving me a look that was neither impatient nor apologetic. You agreed to stay warm, he said. This is warmer. It was infuriating that his logic made sense. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a muted click, sealing out the rain and the city and the version of myself that had been driving alone less than an hour ago. A woman in a simple black dress appeared from a hallway to the right, her posture professional and calm. She nodded once to Adrian, then turned her attention to me without judgment. Miss Carter, she said gently, and the fact that she knew my name sent a flicker of unease through me. There is a guest room prepared. I shot Adrian a sharp look. Prepared. His expression remained steady. I do not improvise security, he answered. You said this was about protection, I reminded him. It is, he said. And protection requires planning. The woman gestured toward a staircase that curved upward with quiet elegance. I stood frozen for a moment longer, then followed because standing in the foyer arguing felt pointless. The guest room at the end of the hall was larger than my entire apartment. Soft gray walls. A king-size bed with crisp white linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline in the distance. Everything immaculate. I stepped farther into the room, my sneakers leaving faint damp prints on the hardwood floor, and suddenly felt embarrassed by the state of myself. There are dry clothes in the closet, the woman said softly. If you require anything else, I am nearby. She left without another word. The door remained open. That detail did not escape me. Adrian stood just outside in the hallway, not crossing the threshold. You may lock it if that makes you more comfortable, he said evenly. I stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation, of threat, of something darker beneath the calm exterior. Why are you doing this? I asked finally. He considered the question for a long moment before answering. Because someone decided you were vulnerable tonight, he said quietly. And I disagree. The simplicity of it unsettled me more than any dramatic declaration could have. You cannot just decide to take responsibility for a stranger, I insisted. His gaze did not waver. I can, he replied. And I did. There was no arrogance in his tone. Only certainty. I swallowed, my emotions tangled between anger and something dangerously close to relief. This does not make me yours, I said carefully. A faint pause. Then, softer than before, I know. That single admission shifted something in the air between us. He was not claiming ownership in the way I had feared. He was drawing a boundary around danger instead. Get some rest, Olivia, he said quietly. Tomorrow, we will discuss what happens next. He stepped back, giving me space, and for the first time since the crash, I realized he had not once tried to touch me again. The hallway lights dimmed slightly as he walked away, and I stood alone in a room that did not belong to me, wearing a coat that did not belong to me, in a life that had changed direction in less than 60 minutes. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, my heart still racing. I had wanted to escape someone tonight. Instead, I had walked straight into someone far more powerful, and I was not sure which of those realities was more dangerous. I did not sleep. I told myself I would close my eyes for 5 minutes, just long enough for the trembling in my hands to stop, but every time I drifted, I saw headlights in the rain and heard the quiet certainty in Adrian's voice telling me accidents did not exist. The bed was softer than anything I had ever owned, the sheets cool and smooth against my skin, and that somehow made it worse. Comfort felt undeserved here. Foreign. I lay on my side, staring at the faint outline of the city beyond the tall windows until the sky shifted from deep navy to pale gray. When I finally sat up, the room looked different in daylight. Less dramatic. More real. Which meant last night had been real too. The closet held neatly arranged clothing in neutral tones. All new. Tags still attached. Jeans in my size. Sweaters that looked understated but expensive. Even shoes placed carefully on the lower shelf. I ran my fingers over the fabric, unsettled by how precisely everything seemed prepared. I chose the simplest outfit I could find, dark jeans and a soft cream sweater, and changed quickly, folding my damp clothes into a careful pile as if tidiness could restore control. When I opened the bedroom door, the hallway was quiet, sunlight filtering in through tall windows and reflecting off polished floors. No guards in sight. No obvious tension. Just silence. I followed the faint sound of movement downstairs and found myself in a kitchen larger than my entire apartment, marble countertops gleaming beneath recessed lighting. Adrian stood at the far end, sleeves of his crisp, white shirt rolled up just enough to reveal strong forearms, his posture relaxed but composed. He looked up when he heard me enter, his expression unreadable for a split second before softening almost imperceptibly. "Good morning, Olivia," he said evenly. The normalcy of the greeting felt surreal. "You did not have to stay," I replied automatically, even though I had nowhere else to go at midnight in a storm. "I know," he said simply. A cup of coffee sat on the counter near the island, steam curling upward. "No sugar," he added. I stared at it. "How do you know how I take my coffee?" A faint pause. "I do not," he admitted. "If you prefer otherwise, I will correct it." I hesitated, then stepped forward and wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic. It was black, exactly how I drank it. The heat steadied me more than I expected. "What happened to him?" I asked quietly, not using a name. Adrian did not pretend to misunderstand. "He will not approach you again," he said. His tone was calm, not threatening, not dramatic, just factual. I searched his face for signs of cruelty or pride and found neither. "You cannot control people like that," I said, though I already suspected he could. "I can influence outcomes," he replied. "There is a difference." I let out a slow breath. "And what outcome do you expect from me?" His gaze held mine steadily across the kitchen island. "Clarity," he said. "You were afraid. You should not have been alone." The statement irritated me. "I am capable of taking care of myself." "You were running," he reminded me gently. That stung because it was true. I took a sip of coffee, buying time. "So what now?" I asked finally. "You said we would discuss what happens next." Adrian stepped closer, not crowding me, but near enough that I could see the faint shadow beneath his eyes that suggested he had not slept much either. "Now," he said quietly, "we decide whether last night was an interruption in your life or the beginning of something that was always going to find you." My heart skipped at the phrasing. "That sounds dramatic," I said, attempting lightness I did not feel. "It is realistic," he corrected softly. Sunlight caught in his dark hair as he leaned one hand against the counter, posture open, no visible threat. "You crossed into my world," he continued. "That changes things." I swallowed. "For you or for me?" A faint, almost private smile touched his mouth. "For both of us." The certainty in his voice unsettled me more than the gates closing the night before. Because this time, it was not about protection. It was about choice. And I was beginning to understand that the most dangerous thing about Adrian Romano was not his power. It was the way he spoke as if the future had already made up its mind. Choice. The word followed me long after he said it, lingering in the quiet space between us like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. I set the coffee cup down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the marble counter, as if precision could anchor me. "You keep speaking as if my life shifted last night," I said, holding his gaze. It did not. I still have a job, an apartment, responsibilities. Adrian did not argue. He simply watched me with that steady, evaluating calm that made me feel seen in ways I was not used to. "Then go," he said. The simplicity of it startled me. "Go back to your apartment, to your routine. I will have your car replaced. Insurance will not trouble you. Your life will continue." My chest tightened unexpectedly. "Replaced," I repeated. It was not just a car. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the correction. "Then repaired," he amended. "The point remains." I crossed my arms, more for comfort than defiance. "And you expect me to just accept that?" "I expect nothing," he replied. "I offer stability." Stability. The word sounded foreign in my world of late rent notices and unreliable promises. "Nothing in your world looks stable," I said quietly. His eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. "It is more stable than you think." A subtle tension entered the room as one of the suited men appeared in the doorway, speaking softly in Italian. I did not understand the words, but I understood the shift in Adrian's posture. He listened without interruption, then nodded once. The man left as quietly as he had come. "What was that?" I asked. Adrian returned his attention to me. "A reminder," he said calmly. "That time moves whether we decide or not." I did not like the way that sounded. "Is someone coming here?" He held my gaze. "No. One you need to concern yourself with." That was not reassuring. "You do not get to decide what concerns me," I said, my voice firmer now. Something changed in his expression then, not irritation, but respect. You are right, he acknowledged. Then allow me to clarify. There are business matters that do not involve you. I will keep it that way. The deliberate phrasing eased something inside me, though I did not want it to. I walked toward the large windows overlooking the grounds, sunlight spilling across polished floors. From here, the world looked peaceful, controlled. You talk about protection like it is simple, I said softly. It is not. Protection can feel like a cage. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Adrian moved to stand a few feet away, not too close, not distant either. A cage has bars, he said quietly. You are standing by an open door. I turned to face him fully. Am I? He did not hesitate. Yes. The certainty in his answer unsettled me because I believed him. I could leave. He would not physically stop me. That much was clear. But the deeper question was whether leaving meant stepping back into something worse. If I walk out right now, I said carefully, what happens? Adrian's jaw tightened just slightly, the only visible sign of tension. You return to uncertainty, he replied, and I remain aware of it. My heart skipped. You would still watch? A faint pause. Yes. The honesty of that admission stole my breath. It was not possessive in tone. It was protective, intentional. Why? I demanded softly. You barely know me. He studied me for a long moment, the silence stretching but not uncomfortable. Because you are not reckless, he said at last. You were afraid. There is a difference. And fear should not be exploited. The conviction in his voice did not feel performative. It felt personal. I swallowed, the weight of last night settling differently now. You cannot fix everything, I said. I am not trying to fix everything, he answered quietly. Only what crossed my path. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than before. I realized then that this was not about control in the way I had imagined. It was about boundaries, about influence, about a man who had built a world where nothing surprised him and then found himself unexpectedly involved in mine. I exhaled slowly. I need to go to work, I said finally, grounding myself in something ordinary. Then you will, he replied without hesitation. I will have someone drive you. I almost protested out of instinct, then stopped. Last night, I had been alone in the rain. Today I was not, and that realization was more complicated than I wanted to admit. I did not expect the car waiting for me to feel different in daylight, but it did. The same black SUV that had looked intimidating under streetlights now appeared almost understated beneath the morning sun, polished and controlled, blending into the rhythm of a city that did not realize it moved around men like Adrian Romano. I stood at the base of the front steps for a moment, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder, reminding myself that this was temporary. Work, routine, normalcy. You do not have to look like you are walking toward a courtroom, Adrian said from behind me. I turned. He had changed into a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, every line deliberate. It feels like one, I replied. A faint hint of amusement touched his eyes. You are not on trial. That depends on who is watching, I said quietly. He did not deny it. The driver opened the rear door for me, and this time I entered without hesitation, telling myself that accepting a ride did not mean surrendering independence. Adrian did not join me. Instead, he leaned slightly toward the open door. You will be taken directly to your office, he said, and back if you choose. If you choose. The words mattered. I have errands after work, I replied automatically, testing him. He nodded once. Then you will be taken there as well. No resistance. No argument. The door closed gently, sealing me into a cabin that smelled faintly of leather and quiet power. As the vehicle pulled away from the estate, I watched the gates open and then close behind us, wondering why that sound no longer felt entirely like a warning. The drive into the city was smooth, traffic parting almost instinctively. I caught glimpses of my reflection in the tinted window, the cream sweater soft against my skin, hair still slightly damp from the shower. I looked like myself. Almost. When we stopped in front of the physical therapy clinic where I worked, the normalcy of the building's brick exterior and modest glass doors steadied me. This was my world. Fluorescent lights. Schedules pinned to corkboards. The scent of disinfectant and coffee brewed too strong. The driver stepped out first, opening my door with quiet professionalism. I hesitated only a second before stepping onto the sidewalk. People walked past without noticing. Cars honked. Life moved. I was still part of it. I will be here at 5, the driver said calmly. If you require earlier departure, call this number. He handed me a small card. No logo, just a number. I slid it into my bag without comment and pushed open the clinic door. Olivia, my co-worker Jenna called from behind the front desk, her brow furrowing slightly. What happened to your car? I saw the tow notice in the group chat. My stomach tightened. I had forgotten about that. Minor accident, I replied, forcing a casual tone. I am fine. She had my outfit. Since when do you get dropped off in something that looks like it belongs to a senator? Heat crept up my neck. Friend of a friend, I said lightly. It sounded weak even to my own ears. The day unfolded in measured rhythm. Patience. Exercises. Encouraging smiles. Adjustments. But every time my phone vibrated in my pocket, my pulse spiked, half expecting news I did not want to hear. Nothing came. No threats. No messages from the past trying to reclaim me. Only quiet. And the quiet felt intentional. Around noon, I stepped outside for air, leaning against the brick wall of the building and staring up at the clear blue sky. For the first time in months, I did not feel hunted by anxiety. That realization unsettled me more than fear had. My phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. I opened it carefully. It contained only 3 words. You arrived safely. No signature. No elaboration. I did not need one. My heart beat once, hard, then steadied. It was not a demand. Not a command. Just confirmation. I typed a response before I could overthink it. Yes. A moment later, another message appeared. Good. That was all. No emojis. No overstatement. Just calm acknowledgement. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of city air. I had walked into his world last night. By accident. But today, standing outside my own workplace with sunlight warming my face, I began to understand something I had not expected. He had not pulled me away from my life. He had quietly stepped into its perimeter. And somehow, that felt far more deliberate than any declaration he had made in the rain. By 4:58 in the afternoon, I was watching the clock more than my patience, which annoyed me because I prided myself on focus. The clinic lights hummed softly above us, steady and predictable, and I clung to that predictability like it was proof that the last 24 hours had not tilted my world. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, I gathered my bag and said my goodbyes with forced normalcy. Jenna gave me another curious look as I stepped outside. The SUV was already parked along the curb, engine running, polished surface reflecting the golden tint of late afternoon sun. People walked past it without recognizing what it represented. Or maybe they recognized it and chose not to look too closely. The driver opened the door for me with the same calm professionalism as before. I slid inside, feeling that now familiar shift from public chaos to insulated quiet. Home, the driver asked politely. I hesitated. Home no longer felt like a simple word. Not yet, I said. I need to stop by my apartment. He nodded without question and pulled into traffic. The drive was shorter than I remembered, as if the city had rearranged itself overnight. When we reached my building, the contrast between brick walls with chipped paint and the sleek black vehicle waiting at the curb felt almost theatrical. I stepped out and looked up at my third-floor window, blinds slightly crooked the way I had left them. Ordinary. Messy. Mine. I will wait, the driver said. I nodded and walked inside, heart pounding for reasons I did not fully understand. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped into the small space that had once felt like the center of my world. The couch with a worn armrest. The stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. The silence. I moved through each room slowly, checking windows, closets, corners, half expecting something to be different. It was not. But the air felt lighter somehow, less tense, as if the shadow that had followed me for weeks had finally stepped back. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. A message. Are you inside? I stared at the words, then typed back. Yes. A moment later. Stay there. I frowned at the screen. Stay there. The words were not aggressive. They were firm. Intentional. I moved toward the window and parted the blinds just slightly. Down below, the SUV remained parked at the curb, steady and unbothered. A second black vehicle pulled up across the street, then slowly drove past. My breath caught. It did not stop. It did not circle back. It simply continued down the block. My phone buzzed again. You are clear. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Clear. The word carried weight. Not threatened. Not pursued. Clear. I sank onto the edge of my couch, staring at the cracked coffee table in front of me, and something unfamiliar settled in my chest. Relief. Not because someone had removed a problem for me, but because someone had chosen to stand between me and uncertainty without asking for anything in return. My phone buzzed once more. 5 minutes. I will come up. My pulse skipped. I typed back before I could overthink it. You do not have to. The response came almost immediately. I know. I stared at those 2 words, heart beating faster for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. A knock sounded at my door, steady and unhurried. Not demanding. Not loud. Just present. I stood slowly, crossing the small living room, and opened it. Adrian stood there in the hallway, still composed in his charcoal suit, the building's dim lighting softening the sharp lines of his expression. He looked out of place here. Too controlled. Too intentional. Yet he did not comment on the narrow hallway or the aging paint. His gaze moved past me briefly, assessing, then returned to my face. You should not be alone here tonight, he said quietly. Not a command. A statement. I swallowed. And if I want to be? I asked. His eyes held mine steadily. Then I will wait downstairs. The simplicity of that answer stole the argument from my tongue. He was not forcing entry, not claiming space. He was offering presence. And standing there in the doorway of my small apartment, with evening light fading behind him, I realized something that shifted the ground beneath me again. Protection felt different when it came without pressure. And Adrian Romano had mastered the art of standing close enough to shield, but far enough to let me choose. The hallway light flickered once above us, a faint electrical hum filling the narrow space between my apartment door and the stairwell, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Adrian stood there with the kind of stillness that did not demand attention yet commanded it anyway, hands relaxed at his sides, gaze steady but not intrusive. I realized then that he was waiting for my decision, not assuming it. You do not have to guard my door, I said quietly. I am not guarding, he replied, voice low and even. I am present. The distinction settled somewhere deep in my chest. Present. Not hovering. Not controlling. Simply there. I glanced back into my small apartment, at the dim lamp casting soft light over the worn couch and the uneven stack of mail on the counter. This was my life. Imperfect. Ordinary. Safe. Until it was not. Come in, I heard myself say before I could analyze the choice. A subtle shift crossed his expression, not triumph, not satisfaction, but acknowledgement. He stepped inside without brushing against me, careful of the limited space, and the door closed with a quiet click behind him. He did not comment on the scuffed floors or the chipped paint. He did not look out of place the way I expected. Instead, he moved with the same controlled awareness he carried everywhere, as if adapting to my world was not beneath him. It is smaller than your estate, I said lightly, attempting to break the tension. A faint, almost private smile touched his mouth. It is yours, he replied. That makes it significant. The simplicity of that answer disarmed me. I leaned against the counter, folding my arms loosely. You cannot keep doing this, I said after a moment. Stepping in every time something feels uncertain. He turned slightly toward me, the lamplight softening the sharp angles of his face. I do not intend to step in every time, he said. Only when necessary. And who decides what is necessary? I challenged gently. You. He answered without hesitation. The word landed between us, steady and sincere. My pulse quickened. Not from fear, but from the weight of being handed control instead of having it taken. Silence stretched comfortably for a few seconds, filled only by the faint sounds of the city outside. Finally, I exhaled. Last night I thought you were trying to claim something, I admitted. Like I was an obligation you decided to collect. His gaze did not waver. You are not an obligation, he said quietly. You are a consequence. I frowned slightly. That does not sound better. He stepped closer, but still left space, careful, intentional. A consequence is not always negative, he explained. Sometimes it is simply the result of two paths crossing. I studied him, searching for manipulation, for hidden motive. What I found instead was consistency. He had not once raised his voice, not once forced a door open, not once demanded more than I was willing to give. And what happens if I choose not to cross into your world again? I asked softly. His jaw tightened just slightly before he answered. Then I ensure your world remains untouched by mine. The promise was not dramatic. It was controlled, protective without ownership. My heart beat harder at the realization. You said in the rain that I was your wife? I reminded him carefully. A faint shadow of amusement flickered in his eyes. I said many things in the rain, he replied. The storm had dramatic timing. I could not help it. I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. The tension eased instantly. So you take it back? I pressed. He looked at me steadily, expression soft but certain. No, he said calmly. I revise it. My breath caught. Meaning, he continued, voice lower now, that if you ever stand beside me, it will be because you chose to. Not because of a crash. Not because of fear. The words settled into me slowly, reshaping everything I thought I understood about him. This was not a man who thrived on forcing outcomes. This was a man who influenced them, then waited. I stepped closer without realizing it. The small distance between us charged, but not uncomfortable. And if I never choose that? I asked quietly. His gaze held mine, unwavering. Then I will still be grateful you crossed my path, he answered. The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the wall behind him before fading into the night. I realized something then, standing in my modest living room with a man who commanded entire rooms without raising his voice. The accident had not been the beginning of control. It had been the beginning of awareness. He could rule a city if he wanted to. But tonight, he was standing in a small apartment, waiting for a woman to decide whether he belonged there. And for the first time since the crash, I understood that the most powerful thing about Adrian Romano was not that he could claim me. It was that he would not, unless I claimed him first.